Okay, good morning, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome. My name is Ashley Spurgeon with the Building Decarbonization Coalition, and welcome to our monthly webinar series called the Building Decarbonization Coalition Presents. This series brings top thinkers, doers, and disruptors to the public through monthly, sometimes twice monthly, presentations of the latest research, the best practices, technologies, and ideas. And we have a great one for you today, Equitable Electrification with Carmelita Miller. California's ambitious climate protection goals can only be met if all Californians can fully participate in the clean energy economy. So Carmelita is here this morning to share Greenlining Institute's framework for powering resilient communities. Thank you all for joining us this morning, and we hope you enjoy the presentation. I just want to give a brief introduction to the coalition, and then I'll turn it over to Carmelita. The Building Decarbonization Coalition, for those of you who aren't familiar with us, is a nonprofit group made up of energy providers, utilities and CCAs, manufacturers, design and construction, local governments, and NGOs, all coming together to work collaboratively on building decarbonization. We have over 140 members all working together to develop solutions to the market and policy challenges of building decarbonization. And we like to say that we have the best membership of any organization in the world. We adopted a roadmap in January of this year. In that roadmap, we called for the state of California to bring about policy and market changes that would lead us to complete decarbonization of the building sector. Goals include a zero emissions building code for residential construction by 2025 and by 2028 for non-residential buildings. It included a call for the state to be implementing programs that lead to a step down in greenhouse gas emissions from the built environment. 20% by 2025, 40% by 2030, and 100% by 2045. By 2045, we want zero gas emissions from the built environment. Our roadmap can be found on the Building Decarbonization's website at buildingdecarb.org. It's short, it's sweet, you'll love it. Critical to those numerical goals, we laid out 5 philosophical overarching goals. These 5 goals really lay out what the coalition thinks are the most critical guiding principles for the state. We need to build awareness. We need to ensure that customers and contractors receive a good value proposition, a better value proposition out of electric than fossil fuels. We need to make sure that our supply chain is ramped up, and we need to make sure that all of our climate policies are aligned with our construction, energy efficiency, workforce development policies. And this webinar series that we put on is one of the ways that we achieve goal number 1. It helps us to raise awareness about the different issues and topics related to building decarbonization. So I want to thank you all for joining us today. And if you have ideas on other topics you'd like to hear about, please reach out to me. I also want to personally invite you all to join the coalition as founding members. And if you have any questions about what that means, feel free to reach out to me directly at ashley@buildingdecarb.org. We've had over 80 people register for this webinar this morning, so you're all muted. And we're going to request that you ask all of your questions via the chat feature of Zoom. So as you're listening to Carmelita, please feel free to put your questions, comments, thoughts into the chat, and I will moderate at the end of the presentation. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Carmelita. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, Carmelita, and let you get started.
Okay. All right, good morning, everybody. Let me just get my screen up here and hopefully that works out. Ashley, does this show up? Is this showing up fine, or is this smaller version?
Looks good.
Looks
No,
good. Okay, I'll get started. I want to first thank the Building Decarbonization Coalition for inviting me to speak this morning. This is my first webinar and my first meeting with the coalition members. So thank you again for having me here. Again, my name is Carmelita Miller, and I'm an Energy Equity Legal Counsel at the Greenlining Institute. Greenlining is a racial justice organization based in Oakland, California. And here, we envision a nation where communities of color thrive and race is never a barrier to economic opportunity. One of the areas of opportunities we focus on is energy, because energy programs and policies have a tremendous impact on communities of color. Let me start out with our vision for what equitable electrification should do. A few months ago, we hosted, and this is back in July, we hosted a convening, and we've invited different organizations, grassroots organizations, community-based organizations from all regions across California to talk about what we wanted out of this strategy, this amazing strategy that is building decarbonization. And what we came up is this. We said that we want building electrification to focus first and primarily on the goal of improving the health and resilience of the people, and all communities must have the opportunity to shape and benefit from building electrification policies. So from that starting point, we discussed many of the issues that are affecting our communities and what are the ways that building electrification can actually solve them. That was the beginning of our so far short journey into talking about building electrification and the conception of the framework that I'm about to talk about. Excuse me. Why does building electrification matter? It matters because environmental justice communities are hit first and hardest by economic, health, and environmental consequences of dirty energy and climate change. We believe that the process of removing fossil fuel use from our homes can improve the lives and resilience of our people. Electrification can result in healthier homes, cleaner air, lower bills, jobs, and a sustainable environment. We see getting off gas as an opportunity, so long as policymakers and advocates like you put environmental and social justice communities at the front of the line to access these healthier homes. If electrification is rolled out with a commitment to improving health and resilience of these communities, it can be truly transformative. And this will help close the California's clean energy gap. Our framework lays out the steps that we need to take to operationalize equity for building electrification. I've mentioned this phrase, environmental and social justice communities, and this is yet another term that you're going to see out there. But Greenlining had taken this from a definition that the California Public Utilities Commission and the Disadvantaged Communities Advisory Group, that the definition that they've adopted for environmental and social justice communities. This is a really broad definition and all-encompassing definition for residents who are predominantly people of color or living in low incomes, underrepresented in policy settings or decision-making process, subject to disproportionate impact from one or more environmental hazards, likely to experience disparate implementation of environmental regulations and socioeconomic investments, and those who are living in disadvantaged communities, tribal lands, low-income households, and low-income census tracts. Electrification is a racial justice issue, and I want to make sure that that is clear, that coming from Greenlining, that this is very clear. We've actually partnered with Energy Efficiency for All, a coalition of organizations across the country, but we also have a Energy Efficiency for All California that is made up of coalition members that are fighting for clean energy and access to affordable housing. We've partnered with the coalition to make sure that we put race at the center of the building electrification issue. The fact that people of color are struggling economically as a result of historic racism and redlining cannot be overstated. Our approach to decarbonization advocacy must include the acknowledgement that historic and systemic harms that our communities continue to suffer, both economically and environmentally, affect existing energy policies and people's inability to participate in the green economy. In our framework, once you have it and see it, you'll see that we first talk about the many barriers that environmental social justice communities or ESJ communities are experiencing. And I believe that to many of you, this isn't the first time you're hearing about these barriers that I'm quickly highlighting. It is important, though, to repeat them in the context of building electrification, because a lack of just and equitable transition plan is not the same as missing out on let's say, a fair share of public funding invested through clean energy programs or benefits of these programs. Not having a transition plan away from fossil fuel use can exponentially increase the hardships that our communities are facing. So we want to really emphasize that here. In California, our people cannot make the switch on their own. Most of the people I'm talking about can barely afford to live in the state, let alone think about how to convert their houses to an all-electric home. I can tell you that my family, my friends, my community, and those who I consider my people don't typically wake up in the morning and ask themselves, what am I going to do today? What do I need to buy to electrify my home? For the most part, we're all thinking, what must I do today to keep my job, or to look for another job, or to look for a job, to put food on the table, to keep the roof above my head, right? These are the more important issues that ESJ communities are facing. In addition to that, energy insecurity in California and also in many other states is extremely high. Turn Disconnections report stated that between 19 to 25% of Californians are energy insecure. For those of you who don't know what energy insecurity means, what it is a person's inability to pay their energy bills without trading off another basic household expense, such as food or medical care. So between 19 to 25% of Californians are facing these decisions almost on a daily basis. Are they going to pay to keep their power on? Or are they going to buy medicine for their kids or make sure that they're not late paying rent? And speaking of rent, that's another economic barrier that our communities are facing. Renters have very limited choices. And let's say we're not talking about extremely low income or low income communities, even higher income renters who can afford the upfront cost of switching their homes. They don't have the property rights to actually make these kinds of changes, right? Because they're renters, they need their landlord's permission. And the landlord may or may not have an incentive to switch. If the landlord decides that they want to switch the building away from fossil fuel, the renter is then facing risks of rent increases because they're not paying, they're now paying for a better building or a better house, or getting displaced from their home if they can no longer afford to pay the rent, if it's too high, or if the owner converts the building. The next set of barriers that we talk about are what we're coining as regulatory barriers, but really what they mean is just a lack of program and funding alignment that create a confusing landscape where we now have to plug in building electrification policies. Most of the housing stock where ESJ residents live needs more than just energy upgrades. These buildings often need to be treated for mold, asbestos, or structural issues like damaged walls or leaky roofs. Existing incentive programs for energy retrofits require that homes be free of these problems before being treated, and these programs have no requirement to refer for referral or following up if the program finds out that there are structural barriers that they have to first get fixed. Similarly, there are programs designed for improving health, public health, or habitability, and they're not connected to the energy upgrade programs that we know. The second barrier is that we don't have enough education and outreach plans that is created to engage all Californians, but especially ESJ residents. Many residents are actually interested in understanding the indoor air quality benefits that electrification will provide, as well as the connection between gas use and climate change. A culturally appropriate education, in-language, and awareness campaign about the topic of building electrification, delivered by trusted messengers from the communities, such as community-based organizations, could increase the awareness of fossil fuel ecosystem and its presence in our home and what it does to our family members, to us. And that will lead to more engagement from communities. We need to figure out, essentially, how decarb policies and programs can help lessen or work around these barriers as soon as possible. The risk of communities remaining on gas, such as increases in energy bills or gas bills, and possibly some safety and reliability concerns, will further exacerbate the hardships that I just mentioned. And so here, like I said, we've laid out a five-step framework to really talk about and give guidance on how to operationalize equity. Right? We often throw around the word equity, but many of us don't really know how that quite looks like in everyday lives and running programs and creating programs and policies. Here are the 5 steps that we've created for equitable building electrification. The first step is we got to assess the community's needs. We got to get in there. We need to understand the barriers preventing community members from electrifying their homes and think about the residents' knowledge levels regarding building electrification and their specific needs and concerns. After doing that, we need to establish community-led decision-making. And this is a bigger point that I'll make later about the importance of communities' engagement and also leading decisions regarding how to decarbonize their environment. We need to listen to people who are most impacted and include them in decision-making at every jurisdiction level. I'm not talking about just statewide, but neighborhoods, cities, and nationwide. Step 3, we need to develop metrics and a plan for tracking. And we got to develop metrics that actually will look at the impacts of a program or policy on equity. We need to develop them and measure the success. Is it making a difference in, for example, in energy insecurity, and how? We need to track these metrics and include both clean energy benefits like greenhouse gas reductions and community benefits, such as, for example, workforce development, or like I said, reducing energy insecurity. The 4th step is improving funding for existing programs, especially energy efficiency and program leveraging. We need to coordinate existing low-income energy programs to maximize the impacts of building electrification benefits, energy efficiency, renewable energy, and also looking at non-energy programs like housing programs and public health benefits or programs. We need to be able to see how we can leverage and stack up these programs so that we can really maximize what we're providing, what building electrification can provide to our residents. And lastly, step 5, we want to make sure that we're constantly creating a feedback loop to improve existing programs, so that, you know, those programs that are not good enough for our ESJ community members can be improved in the next cycle, or we can stop programs that are just not delivering equitable benefits, or create newer programs that will address unaddressed challenges. Right now, I'd like to turn and use the remainder of my time to quickly talk about an example from California where the 5 framework steps that I've talked about have actually been exemplified to create a pilot program for ESJ communities. And this is the San Joaquin Valley pilots. In California's rural San Joaquin Valley, the color of your skin remains a primary indicator of whether you have access to essential public infrastructure and the ability to access clean water, clean energy, and housing. Compared to whites, Hispanic and African Americans in this 8-county region have nearly 3 times the rate of poverty, 3 times the rate of unemployment, and half the per capita income. More than half of these residents live in high or very high poverty neighborhoods compared to only about 20% of the white residents. Important to this webinar is another characteristic that these households have. They had no access or have no access to gas, to natural gas. A bill called AB 2762 required the CPUC to open a proceeding in order to provide access to cleaner and more affordable energy to the Valley residents living in disadvantaged communities. Greenlining was a party to this proceeding. And I'm going to fast forward a little bit through many of the details, but essentially through the leadership of assigned Commissioner Martha Guzman Aceves and the local community-based organizations and activists. And I'll give a really quick shout out here to Self-Help Enterprises, the Center for Race, Poverty, and Environment, and Leadership Council. Through their work, the commission approved 11 pilots, about 1,800 homes, where so far at least 9 of them include building electrification for the residents. A central objective of the pilot is ensuring that households, including those occupied by tenants, experience bill savings as a result of the pilot and do not suffer negative unintended consequences, including rent increases that would cause displacement, that I talked about earlier. We also have these common community elements, which means that every single pilot must have qualities such as every single pilot must have these qualities such as outreach and education for participants, bill protections for all electric customers, workforce training or local hiring requirements, landlord-tenant participation agreements to address the split incentive challenge, availability of contingency funding, data gathering, and post-implementation evaluation. But really the biggest lesson that I believe we've learned or we've taken away from this ongoing process, the pilots are about to be implemented, so they're, we still have a long ways to go. But what we've learned so far is the step number 2 in our framework, the community-based decision making is possible. It's possible if everyone is willing to commit to equity. And here in the San Joaquin Valley pilots, we've seen how the organizations that I mentioned earlier work closely with commission and commission staff to get them included in the decision-making process. This, became possible because the commission was willing to hold the workshops all across the valley, and especially in pilot communities. They've scheduled the workshops so that they've eliminated most of the barriers of people participating in the workshops. So they've held it when people most likely aren't working. They've provided support like food and transportation and even childcare. And so they really were true to their word that they wanted to hear from the community members. And through these workshops, our residents learned about what are the different affordable clean energy options that are available to them. And they were able to learn and perhaps, in some part decide for themselves what really is the most beneficial choice for them. Is it asking for an extension of natural gas into their neighborhoods, or is it other cleaner options? And so what we're advocating here from Greenlining and Energy Efficiency for All is that we as advocates, we as stakeholders in this process, we always have to think about the people first and understand that they have their own voice. They know what they want, just like you. As I'm sure you know what you want for your home. You have needs that you also want to be addressed. That is very similar to ESJ communities. The residents here just want the opportunity to be able to be heard, and also understand what else is going on that's going to affect their near-term and long-term future. And I'll end with that, and we'll take some questions, and hopefully I can provide some answers.
Okay, we've got our first question in the morning. Is Greenlining studying community solar as a means of reducing electricity rates for ESJ communities to facilitate electrification?
Not yet. It is separately an issue that Greenlining has been involved in for a very long period of time. Access to community solar, access of low-income communities to solar. So we've been involved in various different proceedings that tackle that. But as it relates to and as it supports building electrification, not yet. But as now that I've said that, because we are working on these two separate topics separately, it is in the very near future that we combine these policies to figure out what is the best pathway, what is the best strategy for the communities.
All right. Great. Next question coming in. Someone would like to know more about what options were presented to residents in San Joaquin Valley.
I'm sorry, Ashley, can you repeat that, please?
Absolutely. Sorry. Can you tell us more about what options were presented to the residents in San Joaquin Valley?
Yes, I can tell you a little bit more, although I'll have to admit that I was not the representative for greenlining in that proceeding, but I believe that there were definitely options for extending, like I said, extending access to natural gas because residents there throughout the entire valley, and I think it's about 170 communities have no access to that. The other options are, of course, combining renewable energy like solar. I think there might be one pilot. Again, please don't quote me on this one. I can look back at the proceeding and actually look at what they have that involves storage, demand response, I think, and building electrification. And whatever combination that is, that's what I personally don't know right now. I don't know the details of each of the pilots.
Okay. Can you speak more on eliminating barriers to community participation, and how do you reach linguistically isolated people?
Thank you for asking that. There are a lot of ways to do that, and again, I welcome whoever asked that to contact me directly. We cannot emphasize enough the importance of community-based organizations and their leadership within the community. That is where you will find me as a greenlining staff. When I pick up the phone first, I will be asking someone from the community to get me connected. So we all know that, individually we're not capable of speaking all of the languages that are being used here or spoken here in California, but we know that there are communities and community organizations that are very closely working with residents on various issues like healthcare, legal issues, immigration issues, and other kinds of safety net support. And when you approach these organizations, they actually have people on their staff who are not only culturally competent and understand their neighborhoods, their communities, but also speak the different languages. I would suggest to start there. And there are other strategies, of course, I've mentioned earlier, like looking at a venue or a forum where it's easier to capture their attention. You don't want to, create or hold workshops in the middle of the day when people are working. But also it depends on the community. If most of the people in that community aren't working during the day, then maybe that is the best option. It also depends whether the neighborhood is primarily of working adults or elderly. So, there's a lot of things to consider when you want to think about how to eliminate the barriers to participation. And I would start with, asking first, what is the first step, pretty much the first step of the framework? Assess the community that you're targeting. Put together as much as you know about that community, and then reach out right away to a locally based organization.
Thank you. Great answer. Okay, can you go more into the 9 of 11 communities that include electrification? What does that look like?
I actually can't. I don't have, without looking at my notes right now, I can provide whoever asked that question and those who are interested, provide you the contact information for the pilot teams that I talked about earlier. The 3 organizations that are involved in the pilot, and they can give you much more information than I can about the specific communities, their characteristics, and what that's like. What we've really done here is at a high level, wanted to point out here that the framework steps work, and especially the community-led decision-making aspect of it.
If you would send me that information, I'd be happy to send it to the people that registered for the webinar today.
Absolutely.
Great. Thank you. Okay, what's Greenlining's approach for linking your workforce development goals with the joint labor management training programs that both advance worker justice and facilitate upward mobility in the construction sector?
So our approach right now, I cannot provide too much detail because it is on the way, and we're determining what are the best strategies here. But staying true to our own framework, we've started to talk about the different organizations, local organizations who are involved and already have relationship with different labor unions, who are involved in energy efficiency and other clean energy programs. And I think that we need to create a robust conversation between the different parties, the different stakeholders. We need people not just from environmental justice and equity organizations like Greenlining, but we need a representation, like you said, from labor. We need representation from agencies, perhaps, and also we need representation from local nonprofit or community-based workforce development organizations. Our concern with the transition in terms of workforce, which was also briefly discussed in the framework, by the way, and the reason why we didn't have yet a more robust workforce development or workforce discussion in the framework is because we believe that can be a book on its own, and then we're considering whether we're going to publish something on workforce in the near future. But there are two things that are our priorities in terms of workforce. One is definitely the transition of fossil fuel industry workers, of gas workers, and the second one that cannot be forgotten is that the poverty rate and the unemployment rate in ESG communities are still pretty high. So we want to make sure that we're also not forgetting about community members who are looking to get into the green economy and get green jobs. And so we're going to be looking at the issue of workforce with those two lenses: what should be done in terms of the transition, and what can be done so that we can get more of our ESG workers into these jobs, into these clean energy jobs.
All right, I'm going to do my best with this next question. What are some of Greenlining's thoughts on localizing electricity supply? They're doing a feasibility assessment in Berkeley and working with community members, and it's looking like localizing supply is a huge concern, especially for disabled folks as we face continued PSPS from PG&E.
I think that's a really important question. I don't have an answer for that now because there's so many moving parts here, and that's yet just another one. I would be very interested in getting the contact information of the person who asked that, because that is one of the issues that we're going to be looking at. But in terms of feasibility, we haven't started any studies yet, and we're actually looking to our allies. Most of them are part of the Building Decarb Coalition here, to guide us and really talk with us about what are the issues that we should be paying attention to and what strategic points we can help support in advocating.
All right, I have one more. For those members of the San Joaquin Valley that didn't have and wanted access to natural gas, were they presented with equivalent or superior electric options to bypass the need of installing the gas pipes and appliances?
I believe so. And I think that there was a great discussion and also a lot of information provided about the possible bill differences and switching from propane and wood use, to gas versus to an all-electric home. Again, this is another area about the proceeding that I can't provide too much information on. I'm willing to follow up with the person who asked that. But yes, there was a quick answer is yes, there was a huge discussion, and it's an ongoing discussion actually, because I think there's still one pilot or two pilots that are still studying the bill impacts of gas as opposed to the other options. And you know, we've seen that the commission and the pilot team of local organizations have been very committed to continuing that engagement with the residents, so that, you know, we're making sure that everybody who's involved understands what they're getting, but at the same time that you know, to make sure that the residents know that the commission is very committed to protecting the residents' bills from increasing.
Okay, here's one about the landlord-tenant incentive agreements. This is important for any amenity or property upgrades that we're trying to push on a policy level: energy efficiency, electrification, and electric appliances, EV chargers, etc. While we're also trying to ensure renters aren't priced out or displaced by owners raising rent. So what would your advice be for policymakers to ensure those incentive agreements are included in policy?
So I'll take the San Joaquin Valley pilots as an example. As I understand, as of today, and I might be wrong, but I don't think I am, although the commission ruled that must be figured out, I don't think the parties have actually finished figuring that out. There are several parties in that proceeding that have proposed different types of we're calling them tenant protections, or ways to protect the tenants. I think there is this really difficult challenge before the commission, which is, you know, how do you police the agreements? How do you make sure that after they're actually made, that you know, landlords are following them? I think that my advice right now, which has been our position, is to keep up these conversations. Don't give up on the idea that that the commission, the administrators, the residents involved, and the advocates who are involved can figure out a good way to solve this issue. We have to, right? California is in the middle of a massive affordable housing shortage. It's a crisis. So we can't afford to advocate for a very long time to push for these clean energy programs, and then in the end find out that they've actually caused displacement, rent increases, and further hardships on the communities that we've been trying to protect from the get-go. So, you know, I think it would be a big mistake for any agency, any decision maker, anyone with a decision making power, to ignore this issue, because the success of these energy programs that we're talking about will only be realized if there are still people living in the buildings that we're upgrading, that we're making better. But if ESJ community members aren't in those buildings because they can't afford it, or because they've been kicked out, then, you know, what are we really talking about here? So we got to combine the need to improve the built environment and you know, to care about how to make sure that people can still afford to live in it.
We've gotten some great questions. Are there any more? Now's your chance. Well, it's sounding like that might be the end of it. Thank you so much, Carmelita, for your time and for your great answers to everyone's questions.
Thank you so much for having me again, Ashley.
Thank you. If there are any more questions, guys, feel free to email Carmelita or myself, and we'll get you some answers. Thanks, everyone, for your time this morning, and have a great rest of your week.